Maxwell today for the talk of today. So Dr. Jessica Maxwell is a social psychologist who studies sexuality and close relationships. Prior to her appointment as an assistant professor here at Mac, in the Department of Health, Aging and Society, she was a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. So she came a long way. So in this talk, she will present 3 papers in progress that she's working on currently. These papers detail how our beliefs about the self, world, and sexuality shape our sexual and relationship satisfaction. I'm not going to go into details into each of the 3 studies because that's what Jessica is going to do. And so with no further ado, thank you very much, Dr. Maxwell, for giving this presentation. And I look forward to hearing it for you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and thanks so much, Shiva and Amanda, for organizing and for all of you being here today. This is such a great turnout, so thanks so much. I'm just gonna hopefully, does that look good? Everyone can see my slides, but not my embarrassing presenter notes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. And if for some reason the audio glitches, hopefully someone can just let me know. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be with you all here today to share with you some of my in-progress work about our beliefs in the bedroom and beyond. So I hope it's clear from the talk title that you're not in the wrong place. I do study sexuality and people's sex lives. That's an important part of what I do. And so depending on the audience, I sometimes face a little bit of an uphill battle when getting people to take this content seriously. So I really like to remind folks that having frequent and satisfying sex is linked to better physical health across the lifespan. It's related to increases in our positive mood and life satisfaction, and it can even boost your work productivity. Perhaps most importantly as well, our sexual satisfaction predicts subsequent increases in our relationship satisfaction. And when we have a thriving relationship, that can have many of these same benefits and many more. But despite these benefits of sex, sexual satisfaction can be really tricky to maintain. And actually, sexual issues are the #1 reason couples end up fighting and breaking up and seeking divorce. So while the field of sex and relationships has grown exponentially in recent years, we still have a long ways to go in terms of understanding how we can have thriving relationships and sex lives. So that's where my research comes in. And when I'm not trying to entice you to come to my talk with a sexy title, I often title my talks on my work something more like this: Applying Social Cognition Concepts to Sexual Relationships, because this reflects my training as a social psychologist and my belief that often what makes for great sex isn't necessarily what we do between the sheets, but rather what's going on between our ears. I mean, stuff that's going on in our brain or our beliefs. So I've attempted to create a theoretical model to capture some of the ways in which our sex life might create greater relationship well-being and overall well-being, as well as beliefs that might intervene between that pathway from good sex and all of these benefits. So this model might look complicated at first, but it's really quite a simple idea. It's just saying that when we have good sex with our partner, we tend to feel better about our partner and our relationship. And then some of that good feelings about our relationship makes us feel better about our life overall. So today what I'm going to do is zero in on 2 particular components of my model. So 2 specific beliefs that might affect the quality of sex we have with our romantic partner, as well as beliefs that might exacerbate that link between our sex life and our relationship quality, or things that might be barriers between the link between sex and having a good quality relationship. More specifically, for today's talk, I'm organizing these beliefs into our beliefs about ourselves, the world around us, as well as beliefs about sex itself. And I've chosen these 3 studies to focus on today because they're ones I'm currently trying to write up for publication. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts, questions, comments, etc. And I tried to specifically pick some breadth in the types of topics I'm talking about to hopefully capture something that might be of interest to you or relevance to your own work. You'll notice I also have some font in light gray here. So these are other projects I have ongoing on these similar themes that I'm not going to talk about today, but you're welcome to ask me questions about them, either in the question period or if you see me hanging around Kenneth Taylor Hall. So, first, how might our beliefs about ourselves shape our sexual satisfaction? My current PhD student, Shakira from New Zealand, really wanted to focus in here on the role of body satisfaction. It's perhaps not surprising to many of us that it's getting increasingly hard to have good views of our body, and body dissatisfaction is something that's been a concern in Western society for many decades. We can blame things like the rise of social media that gives us all these unattainable body standards that we might make social comparisons to, for instance. You can blame the Kardashians and Photoshop, for instance, but it does seem to be true that more than ever before, it's hard to maintain great views about your body. So, when I'm talking here about body satisfaction, we're using this definition in the literature that's the evaluative aspect of your body image. So, it's do you think your body is appealing or unappealing? As you could imagine, people can be satisfied or dissatisfied with various aspects of their body. And this satisfaction or lack thereof has been linked to a lot of different outcomes. So, when we feel good about our body, it tends to be the case that we report higher quality of life. We report greater psychological and social functioning, including things like greater self esteem and lower depressive symptoms. And then, given these broad benefits for body satisfaction to well being, it's perhaps not surprising that body satisfaction has benefits for relationship quality as well. So, within marriages, those who are more satisfied with their bodies, for both men and women, they report greater marital satisfaction, whereas poor body satisfaction is associated with decreased ability to orgasm, reduced pleasure during sex, and might even cause couples to avoid sex altogether. Whereas those who have those more positive views of their body tend to have greater sexual functioning. So, because our body satisfaction is linked to our sexual satisfaction, and as I mentioned in the intro, sexual satisfaction is robustly linked to relationship satisfaction, some scholars have posited that the reason body satisfaction affects relationship quality is through what's going on in the sexual domain. But past research has mostly focused in on young heterosexual individuals and often looks at just the effects for women. So, a key goal of our study was to test and expand the generalizability of this pattern of results. And this is really important given a lot of recent large scale review papers in both sexuality and relationship science have pointed to the need for greater diversity and generalizability. So, to make it really concrete here, to give you some examples, the average age in relationship studies is around 30 years old, and only 3% of studies have average ages of 50 or above. And that's in relationship science, broadly, not even body satisfaction is usually even worse for focusing in on young folks. And overall, there's a lack of diversity in the types of individuals and relationships that are represented. We usually see a lot of research just on heterosexual folks. So we really wanted to look at a community sample of partnered individuals in New Zealand and see whether, with a broader population, we would still replicate this pattern of results that body satisfaction predicts sexual satisfaction, which in turn predicts relationship satisfaction. And then we wanted to see and test specifically whether this pattern differed by demographic groups, namely sexual orientation and age. So we know from a lot of other work that sexual orientation can affect group differences in body satisfaction. So, for instance, gay men tend to show poorer body satisfaction. They're less satisfied with things like their muscle mass and their physical appearance. And they often experience levels of body dissatisfaction comparable to straight women. But I want to be clear, that's not actually what we're testing in our study. So we're not looking at mean differences in body satisfaction, which of course is interesting, but has been looked at a lot. We're looking at whether there's group differences in the extent to which your sexual satisfaction is based in your body satisfaction. So, for instance, we felt that maybe given all of these pressures for gay men to look a certain way, they might show a particularly strong link between their body satisfaction and their sexual satisfaction. Oh, oops. It's a lot less clear what would happen for same-sex attracted women. So some studies find they have equal or sometimes greater body satisfaction than straight women. But of course, our question is more whether, for instance, lesbian women might not prioritize body satisfaction as much when thinking about their sex lives. As I mentioned as well, most of this research looks at young folks. So we wanted to test whether that link between your body and your feelings about your sex life might get stronger as you age. So, although body satisfaction is quite stable across the lifespan, we could imagine that maybe when older women are feeling more empowered with their sex life, maybe their body satisfaction isn't mattering as much, or the opposite, and perhaps older adults might really strongly base their sex life into how their body is performing and how healthy it is. So, to test these questions, we use an existing sample from the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study, which is a large nationwide survey conducted in New Zealand every year. Although here specifically, I'm looking at one time point, which was the 2020 data set. So when we look specifically at just those in the sample who are involved in romantic relationships, we have a sample of about 25,000 individuals. It is an overrepresentation of women here. But what was exciting for us is we were happy to see that the average age is closer to 54. So it's a lot older and more diverse. And although the majority of the samples self-reported as straight or heterosexual, or I'll often refer to this as mixed sex attracted, we did still have over 700 LGBTQ participants, which gave us enough statistical power to detect our effects. These couples had been together on average about 24 years, and the majority were married. And this, again, is kind of an important extension to the literature, which had often focused on young newlywed couples. So what we did was, because it was part of a much larger survey, we only have one item for each measure, so that is a limitation. And all of the measures I'll speak about today were measured on a 7-point scale. So for body satisfaction, we asked people how satisfied they are with the appearance, size, and shape of their body. For sexual satisfaction, they were asked how satisfied they were with their sex life, pretty face valid there. And relationship satisfaction, how satisfied they were with their relationship. Now, as is common in this type of literature, the results I'm going to present today are controlling for participants' body mass index, depressive symptoms, self-esteem, and we reran the analyses controlling for relationship length. So the analyses you'll see are controlling for these, but I just want to note that you don't need to control for these to see this pattern of results. The first thing we wanted to test was just simply whether we replicate this idea from past research that your body satisfaction is helping you feel better about your sex life, which will help you feel better about your relationship. Of course, this is all cross-sectional though, keep that in mind. And we did replicate past research. So there was a very, very, very small effect between body satisfaction and relationship satisfaction, but we did see that your body satisfaction was positively related to your sexual satisfaction, even with all these confounds controlled. And as always, we see a strong link between sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. And once you account for the role of sexual satisfaction, there's no longer an association between your body satisfaction and your relationship satisfaction. So you can think of this as there being a significant mediation, if you will, a significant indirect effect. Or another way of saying this is just that, yes, part of the reason your body satisfaction is contributing to your relationship satisfaction is because of the effects on the sexual domain. So hopefully I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but I just want to make sure we got this pattern down, because the main point was testing whether this pattern, this like triangle, if you will, was the same across demographic groups. And the first thing I'll note here, in case you were curious, is we did find mean differences in body satisfaction based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So on the y-axis here, I have body satisfaction. And it's important to remember this could actually range from 1 to 7. So the spoiler, just by seeing the numbers, you can tell that, it's not like everybody in the sample is feeling phenomenal about their body, right? We're getting closer to the midpoint here. What you can also see by just a quick glance is that most groups had similar body satisfaction, and it's only the mixed sex or straight heterosexual men who are showing higher body satisfaction that differs from the other groups. So we can keep that in mind, that we do have the straight men reporting higher body satisfaction. But again, that wasn't our key question. Our key question is, well, yes, but are there differences in how much this might affect your sex life? And here we failed to find many differences. So what I mean by this is that for everybody, regardless of whether you're, a same-sex attracted woman, man, or mixed-sex attracted woman or man, we did see that for everybody, sexual satisfaction was accounting for that link between body satisfaction and relationship quality. So there was no moderated mediation. If you're kind of familiar with that concept. But we did find some interesting tidbits when we looked at how these groups were affecting some of the pathways. So this might surprise you because it surprised me. We actually found just one key difference, which was that straight men showed a stronger link between their body satisfaction and their sexual satisfaction than did straight women. And this kind of goes against ideas that women's sexual quality is really tied to how they feel about their body and body confidence. But what we think is going on here, and I'll be curious if other people have other thoughts, is we think that perhaps when men are rating body satisfaction, they might be naturally thinking about maybe their sexual organs or their sexual performance, whereas that is not usually on women's radar when they're rating their own body satisfaction. At least that's the explanation we've come up with so far. We also wanted to test again whether this pattern was generalizable to different age groups, which again is so important because these groups are often neglected in relationship science. And again, the same thing happened where this pattern of results is true for older and younger people, but there are some differences in the strength of the pathways. So for everybody, yes, your body satisfaction is affecting your sex life and therefore your relationship. But we did find some differences where older individuals were showing stronger links between their body satisfaction and their sexual and relationship quality. And I think this is also important to think about when we think about ways we can help older adults have thriving sex lives and relationships, because it does seem like body satisfaction, if anything, is becoming an important component there. So from this study, it just revealed to us that body satisfaction is intimately related to individuals' relationship satisfaction through their sexual satisfaction, regardless of people's age or sexual orientation. And this is really helping to extend the generalizability of past research and the representativeness of the literature. But one key thing to keep in mind here is I was talking a lot about individuals' own beliefs. And we know in close relationships, oftentimes sex is mostly something that's dyadic. It's something between both partners. And so, what we're working on next for Shakira's PhD is looking at how both partner members' body image might combine. So, there's some hints that if I feel better about my body, my partner will feel better about our sex life and we'll have better sex. But what we don't know yet is how partners' body satisfaction kind of interacts or uniquely combines. So, what I mean by this is we're curious whether it just takes one member of the couple to have really good body satisfaction, and that might raise the couple up to be having good sex. If one person's feeling really confident and maybe open to trying new things, maybe both people reap those benefits. But we could also imagine the opposite, that maybe even if I have good body image, if my partner has poor body image, it's possible they're doing things like wanting to have sexual encounters with the lights off or feeling a lot of shame. And maybe that's actually detracting from my sexual experience, regardless of how happy I am with my own body. So we're kind of testing this idea that is it a bad egg that spoils the batch, or however the saying goes, essentially. So is it enough for one partner to have good body satisfaction? Is it better if we have two people who have similarly low body satisfaction versus a discrepancy in body satisfaction, and things like that? So we're about to start our analyses for this using the same data set. So we've got about 1,000 couples there that we can test our questions. So I will be curious if people have thoughts or other things to consider there, but we're really hoping we see some unique effects of both partners' beliefs combining to really capture this idea that sex is something that takes more than one person often. So, the idea of both partners' beliefs combining to influence outcomes is something I investigate in my next study, where here we're going to shift away from your beliefs about your own body to think about your views of the world overall. And I want to give a huge shout out because this was a master's student, Lawrence's work that we finished up. He just graduated from the University of Auckland. I want to start off with a hypothetical question, or maybe it's not so hypothetical if you're currently on the dating scene. Would you date someone with different political beliefs from your own? Well, if we were in person, I'd make you do a show of hands, but I assume what I'd find is that, in our increasingly polarized political climate, the answer to this question seems to increasingly be no. So, for instance, Match.com has found that 70% of its singles say that it's really important for partners to share political beliefs. And ever since 2016, the number of people who report their political affiliation on dating profiles has just, skyrocketed for understandable reasons. But I think it's important to remember that people do enter into relationships with those who hold different political beliefs, or they might have formed a long term relationship much before our politics maybe became as salient and polarizing as they have in recent years. So, how do couples with different political beliefs fare? Are they destined to maybe dissolve like this fated doomed couple on the slide? Or is it possible that having different beliefs maybe helps you see the world through a new perspective, maybe leads to a little bit of like spicy passion between the two? So that brought us to our core research question, which is how does congruence or matching in political orientation, does it predict higher sexual and relationship quality? To answer this question, we can turn to a large body of work from relationship science that touts the benefits of partner similarity. So, meta analyses show that, yes, on average, people tend to pair up with similar others. And when they find someone who has those similar beliefs, they tend to be more satisfied in their relationship. This makes sense because, of course, if you're with someone who's very similar to yourself, you just inherently experience less friction, less conflict. You can feel really validated because they have the same views as you, so you feel good about your own views. There's this idea that similarity is good. And indeed, two recent studies looking at the effects of political similarity have found that when partners match in political beliefs, they tend to report higher relationship and sexual quality. But although the benefits of similarity are really well established for relationship outcomes, it's less well known how similarity on these core traits might affect couples' sex lives. So, when I was thinking about this question, like how might matching in political beliefs affect couples' sex lives, I wanted to turn to what we know about political beliefs and sexual quality in general. From a handful of studies, including one of my own, we know that people higher in conservative beliefs tend to report higher relationship quality and higher sexual quality. And I want to emphasize here this is usually people self reporting themselves that they experience greater sexual and relationship quality. So it's possible the partners of conservative folks might not be as satisfied. So I personally had a really hard time. I apologize in advance for the visual, but I had a hard time imagining that Melania and Donald were having way better sex than the Obamas, for instance, especially because liberal beliefs are correlated with things that we know are really important for sexual satisfaction, like openness to new experience and desire for novelty. So, to test whether the Trumps are truly more sexually satisfied than the Obamas or more than a mismatched couple, we used an existing sample of 966 couples from that same survey, the New Zealand Attitudes and Values study I mentioned earlier. So, these are specifically people where both partners have answered the questionnaire, so we can pair them up and look at both partners' responses. And because it's coming from the same data set, it's a subset of it. The demographics here look quite similar as well. So majority heterosexual, married, and together about 25 years. I forgot to mention for the last study, but all of my studies, I pre-registered our analytic plan on the Open Science Framework. So you can always scan that QR code and that should take you to where we put all our hypotheses and analyses and that analytic plan before we actually received the data. Of note, about half of our sample did vote for the liberal type Labour Party in the previous election. So that was the 2020 election. They've just recently had an election. I haven't had the chance to look at that data yet. And importantly, what we did was we asked each couple member those questions you saw before. So, how satisfied are you with your sex life? How satisfied are you with your relationship? And we asked them on a 7-point scale how liberal to conservative they were, where higher scores here reflect more conservative beliefs. Perhaps not surprisingly, in these long term couples, we found that couple members' political orientations were moderately correlated. But importantly for me, and thank goodness for me, there was significant number of discrepant couples in order for me to be able to run the tests I did and to investigate our core questions. So there is this moderate correlation, but we do have enough discrepancies to run the analyses we had planned. So I conducted two separate dyadic response surface analyses. So I'm going to refer to those as DRSA, one for each outcome variable, relationship, and sexual satisfaction. And what DRSA is it's a polynomial regression that allows us to look at curvilinear effects and really to see in a continuous manner how both partners' political beliefs combine to influence sexual and relationship quality, and it plots those results in 3D space. I'm very happy to answer questions about this later. If you are familiar with these models, you'll recognize that this is a graph of our hypothesized pattern of results. So in this graph, this is saying that more similar couples, and especially those who match at the more extreme ends of the political spectrum, are those who are the most satisfied. So I usually walk people through these graphs really, really carefully. So I make sure we all understand. But for now, I just want you to keep this hypothesized pattern in mind. Okay. So this is the shape of our hypothesized graph, because what you can tell immediately is that is not what we found, unfortunately. So we failed to find evidence that matching in your political beliefs mattered for your relationship satisfaction. So, in other words, couples reported just as high relationship satisfaction if they aligned versus did not align in political beliefs. So, alignment here is shown in this purple circle, which is us if we both aligned at liberal beliefs, whereas this blue circle here is if I am more conservative and my partner is more liberal. And you can tell just by eyeballing it, these are very, very close in terms of our satisfaction levels. The same thing happens when we look at sexual satisfaction. So, again, there's no evidence that matching in your political beliefs affected your sexual satisfaction. We found one interesting tidbit where people who matched at the more extreme ends of the political spectrum, whether that was the left wing or the right wing, tended to be a bit more satisfied than those who matched at those more moderate political beliefs. So this could be, for instance, that maybe those at the more political extremes are engaging in certain behaviors that's making them more satisfied, whereas maybe if you match at more moderate beliefs, politics is less salient, it doesn't matter so much. But really, the takeaway here from both the relationship and sexual satisfaction results is that unfortunately, we didn't find much and not what we expected. We weren't finding strong evidence that, two conservatives are much happier than two liberals or than a liberal and a conservative, etc. But what we had thought a priori is that maybe these continuous metrics of political orientation aren't where we're going to see the effects. Maybe it's not where it matters so much. Maybe we'll find effects if we look at politics in a more sort of American kind of dichotomous fashion. So, what I did was I classified people based on whether they voted for the conservative type National Party in the last election or the liberal type party. And so what I did then was coded whether couples were a couple where both voted conservative, both voted liberal, or it was a mismatch. Of course, there are other political parties, so those were considered missing data. And here we just found one potentially interesting thing for relationship satisfaction where couples where both voted conservative were higher on relationship quality than those where both voted liberal, although neither of those groups differ from that mismatched couple. So another way of saying this is that this isn't really supporting my ideas about matching in political beliefs or about political similarity. It's actually just echoing my previous work and others' work showing that maybe conservatives are happier in the sexual domain. And I'm sure that's something we can talk a lot about in the question period because I have a lot of thoughts. And I will note as well, in case you're curious, we made sure that these results held true when we controlled for relationship length, when we factored in household income, because that's related to political beliefs and satisfaction, and when we limited our analyses to just the men-women couples in our sample. Now, an important limitation to this work is it was conducted in New Zealand, and New Zealand is not getting politically polarized over time compared to other countries, for instance. The particular wave of data was collected during COVID, but I hope, if anything, we might expect that would have exacerbated political differences between couples. And I think it's important that even though we overall didn't find strong evidence of matching in political beliefs that it, mattered for your relationship or sexual satisfaction, it is a really important caveat to keep in mind that these are established long-term relationships for the majority of folks. So if we bring it back to my opening question, perhaps people aren't necessarily opting to date those with different political beliefs, but maybe if you've already found your person, your soulmate, and you're not exactly politically matched, maybe you're okay. Now, although we failed to find this evidence that compatibility and political beliefs affected relationship and sexual satisfaction in that study, it's important to keep in mind that compatibility might be more important for some people than others when they are dating. That is, there might be people who place a high premium on initial compatibility, and they might exit relationships really early on if things aren't going well. So, in this next study, I want to look at how individuals make early dating decisions based on their beliefs about sex. And bear with me, I figured, it's the afternoon, we got to keep you engaged. I want you to consider Sex in the City to help illustrate my example. So, two characters on Sex in the City illustrate my point quite well. Because in this case, Charlotte has just dated someone and she's saying, kind of complaining to her friends, he's a really bad kisser. Her friend Samantha says, no questions asked, you got to dump him. He's a bad kisser. It's non negotiable. Whereas Charlotte says, well, maybe we can work on it. So, in other words, Samantha is taking that sign of sexual incompatibility as a sign that you should head for the door, whereas Charlotte is more taking a growth oriented mindset and thinking that she can work on these things. Now, these different beliefs about dating and sexuality are things that I and others have looked at in the literature before. So, if you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work, you might recognize that these are very similar to the idea of growth or incremental mindset compared to a more fixed or entity mindset. So, specifically, I've developed a scale to look at two different types of sexual beliefs, what I call sexual destiny and sexual growth beliefs. So, sexual destiny beliefs are more that belief that Samantha was espousing. And it's topped with items like a couple is either destined to have a satisfying sex life or they are not. And some of the other items focus on, sex will be good if you just find the right partner. Or the idea that you can tell right from the first sexual encounter if your relationship will ultimately be satisfying. Now, people get scores on sex destiny, but they also get scores on sexual growth beliefs. So these are somewhat independent beliefs, although they're typically negatively correlated. And so sexual growth beliefs are more the idea that your sex life is like a garden. You can really nurture it, tend to it, and then it'll thrive. So people who hold sexual growth beliefs endorse items like successful sexual relationships require regular maintenance, and they're less perturbed by conflicts. So, a large body of work now from myself and others has shown that it tends to be the case that if you have those more growth beliefs, the sexual growth beliefs, you tend to be higher in relationship and sexual satisfaction. Whereas if you have those more ideas about destiny and compatibility and that initial spark, it's not as much of a good story for you. You're less satisfied in your relationship on average, but particularly what happens is if you believe in destiny, things aren't necessarily bad unless you encounter a relationship problem or you're starting to experience some bad sex. Now, an issue with the existing evidence is that it's been really hard to tease apart causality and to really kind of test the direction. So it could be that growth beliefs make you more satisfied in your relationship and your sex life, but it could be the other way around, and more satisfied people tend to show growth beliefs. So that's why I was really excited in the next study to look at people's beliefs in relationships as they unfold over time. And that's really key, again, because most research has looked at long term couples where there might even be a survivorship bias, where if you're high in destiny beliefs, the only way you're going to end up in a long term relationship is if you're with someone compatible. And we don't really know how people kind of make those decisions about compatibility as their relationship is happening. And I also figured that if you kind of know some of these theories, it really should be an early relationship where we see these beliefs really rear their effects on the outcomes. So I've worked with a collaborator here at Western University, and this data was also in part collected by my collaborator in Utah. So we collected the data starting back in 2017 because it's actually surprisingly hard to get people as they're starting to date and follow them over time. Thanks to COVID, we ended up with a couple fewer participants than we wanted, but we've got a sample of 195 individuals. So it's not dyadic data here, just one member of the couple participated. And when we caught them for their intake survey, they had been dating on average just 24 days. Again, we see the majority were dating someone of a different sex. And this sample is about 27 years old, so younger than the other ones, but more established than maybe an undergraduate sample. So when they came to us and started completing the survey about 24 days into dating, we asked them about their sexual beliefs using the items that I mentioned earlier. So sex destiny and sex growth. Do you believe in an initial compatibility? Do you think sex takes effort? And we also asked them at that moment how confident they were that their partner was a good fit for them, given that some research finds that this can be an important factor when considering the effects that sexual destiny beliefs have. Then what we did was each week, for on average about 12 weeks, if they were still dating their partner, they let us know and they answered how happy they were in their relationship. So that was 4 items, but averaged together, they were all pretty face valid like this. And a 1 item sexual satisfaction item. I feel satisfied with my sexual relationship with my partner. Unfortunately, we were hoping we were going to be able to predict breakups in this sample, but even though about half our sample did break up over the course of this study, it wasn't enough statistical power to run the test, unfortunately. What we did find echoed previous research on long-term couples. So we were able to show that your beliefs at that first time point, if you had higher sexual destiny beliefs, you tended to report lower relationship satisfaction and lower sexual satisfaction week to week as your relationship was unfolding. And those effects were exacerbated if you initially were starting to kind of question if you were a good fit. So, in other words, someone like Samantha might, not feel good in a dating relationship if the sex wasn't good right away, and those beliefs would end up detracting from her relationship and sex life as time went on. Whereas we saw the opposite effect for growth beliefs, where here your growth beliefs at the outset of the study predicted higher relationship and sexual satisfaction at the weekly level as the relationship unfolded. So this is exciting evidence, even though it's just replicating findings from the past, it's doing it in this more unique way where we're able to have the beliefs at one point predicting the satisfaction later on. And it's a really important sample. Like I mentioned, I think this is really where we're going to see these beliefs have some of their big effects as you're starting to date and making these decisions. So the takeaway here is that, again, we might be seeing some people sort of bail on their relationship early on if the sex or, sexual compatibility isn't great. Also, those people who endorse those sex destiny beliefs might be experiencing poor quality early dating relationships. And this study is really adding to the lack of literature on really early dating relationships. We often focus on long-term couples or online dating, but not usually this kind of critical period where people are starting to form those relationships. Um, and I'm really excited to kind of continue to pursue this line of research. Thanks to a Shirk IDG, I'm going to actually look at these beliefs in older adults to look at how sex destiny and sex growth might come into play at that different time point where you're encountering different types of sexual challenges, right? It might not be the first time you have sex with someone, but it might be other types of challenges you're encountering. And so I'm hoping that sexual growth beliefs might hold promise for sexual and relationship interventions in that time point. So to bring it all together, to understand how people can have better sex, we need to factor in a wide variety of beliefs and including the beliefs of one's partner, I think, as well. So if we piece together the findings that I've chatted about here today, we can imagine that maybe this person here might struggle to feel sexually satisfied if she feels less confident in her body. And her partner might pick up on this less satisfying sex. And maybe, who knows, maybe she sees that as a sign that their relationship just isn't meant to be. And perhaps these two wouldn't have even fallen into bed in the first place if they didn't even have similar political views. So thank you so much for your attention, and to all of my collaborators, the ones I mentioned on the slides, my students, as well as my other collaborators as well. And I'm very excited to take any questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Jess. That was amazing. I don't see any questions in the chat, so if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're free to do so, and then Jess can take over from
there. Hello, Dr. Maxwell.
Good to see you. Long time no see.
Yeah, too long. Yeah, I just had a question in regards to have to keep up with my what is it? The asking you tough questions. So would you say that perhaps part of the reason why people who have different political beliefs might stick together and work out in the long run, who have already been together, could that be possibly due to things such as sunk cost fallacy, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. So Michael was a student in my close relationship class last year and always kept me on my toes. And as always, I think your
Sure.
observations are really astute. So I think a lot of things could be going on. I think you're right? Like it's not, I would never, because of things like that huge investment you put in, especially these are couples together on average 24 years. Like I don't think one little political spat is going to make you break up, right? Like at that point, you're so established, your commitment levels are so high. Yeah, it's tough to know because I think for some of these couples, we could imagine that maybe politics didn't always come up in the past. So I would be really curious to kind of delve more into some of these couples. It's hard when we have like just this big social survey type thing. Um, I want to know, like, did they always know their partner had different beliefs? One other question, I know this isn't exactly what you're asking, but we don't even know if they know that their partner has different beliefs, right? So one thing that is true in close relationships is we tend to overestimate how similar we are to our partners. So some of these people might just be like kind of living in blissful ignorance, and they might think their partner's like a 7 on conservative beliefs, but they're really like a 5, and things like that. So I think that could be going on as well. But I think you make a great point. Like when we're talking about established couples, it's really hard to get established couples to break up, especially with something like different beliefs, especially when we're contesting with other huge factors like infidelity and things like that. So yeah, thanks so much for your question.
I see that we have a hand up, but just before, there's a question in the chat from Megan that said, just to clarify, would same-sex partners follow this similar pattern of sexual and relationship satisfaction?
Yes, that's a great question. So in that study, I don't know if that was specific to that one, but in all of the studies that I mentioned today, there were a mix of same-sex attracted folks and mixed-sex attracted folks. So in the specific political belief study, we were able to rerun with just LGBTQ folks and just mixed-sex attracted folks, and we saw the same pattern of results. You do, of course, see some differences where on average, the LGBTQ folks are more liberal, right? So I think there's probably less discrepancies in political beliefs amongst that sample, but this general pattern of similarity maybe not mattering as much was true for that population as well. But keep in mind as well, again, there's lots of caveats to these findings, but I think, yeah, I think it's a great question. And I guess if the question was a bit more broadly, I'd say as well, like, what we found in the body satisfaction study is, I think, what often is true in the literature, where oftentimes the same pattern of results happen, right? So sometimes there's mean differences based on sexual orientation on various variables, but oftentimes the core relationship processes are very, very similar.
We can go to
Okay,
Tina. Sorry.
Tina, perfect. Yeah, sorry, I was like, I don't know.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, what a fascinating talk. And, Jessica, I've seen just little bits of your research in the past, but this was really interesting. And I'm so, it's so cool to see these papers put together, and it brings the question to mind of like, really, how do these different kinds of things fit together? And not that you have the answer to this, because I know that this isn't part of your findings, but really, if the idea of a growth mindset, which I know is so important, that you found to sexual satisfaction, but also we know from like the education literature is important to like lifelong learning and educational outcomes. But so putting these together with the other two papers is like, it's like, how it's kind of almost prescriptive, right? Like, do we have an intervention that could help us change our body satisfaction through a kind of growth mindset that makes us understand that our body satisfaction might also be something that we can work on and change, but also, and maybe to a lesser extent, like I think that people's political beliefs change over time when they learn and when they have conversations with their partners over the years and everything. And I don't know, like, I would just like to hear your thoughts on it. And I know you have access to all this great data that is like comes out every year, whatever, is that, is there a way to see how these might work together?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. And I feel silly because I somehow have never actually thought about, I kind of, group these together mostly for the talk today and haven't really taken that bird's eye view and thought about that, about like growth interventions in body satisfaction, or even just helping couples navigate differences, because it ought to work based on the theory and the initial evidence. Because a lot of what's going on I should be clear too, I kind of modeled my idea of sexual growth beliefs on relationship growth beliefs, and that's all about like navigating differences with your partner. But surprisingly, no one's really doing like that type of intervention with couples, and I think it's such a missed opportunity. I've only dabbled in like little article interventions, not like proper interventions. So I feel like it's you're pointing out a really good blind spot, not just in my own research, but also kind of the field more broadly, where we're like touting all these benefits of relationship growth and sexual growth, but not always thinking about how that could be imbued in couples' everyday lives. And I know this wasn't exactly your question, but I think I think even just a general growth mindset would typically work. Like, say I just did kind of a, people can change their personality, people can change things. I don't think it always needs to be specific to like, you can change your sex life in order to see benefits for your sex life. Now, the unfortunate thing is the amazing New Zealand Attitudes and Values Survey currently doesn't have any incremental or entity measures. It doesn't have the growth beliefs. I'm like, maybe I can persuade them to sneak in one or two questions, because that would be amazing to look at. And I think I really resonate with your question in the sense as well. At first, I thought you were maybe asking to like, which comes first, or how do they all fit together? And what's a big issue in my mind with sexuality science right now is that I don't think we have good models. Like, and I don't think the model I put up is like the best or the be all end all, but I'm like, at least I'm trying to put some boxes up there and make some causal processes, because I think right now we just have these great isolated bodies of work being like body satisfaction matters, political beliefs matter, but no one's really interweaving the two. So I think that's a really long way of an unsatisfying answer of like, I think that's a really great comment and giving me things to think about. But I think we need to, as a field, do a little bit better about integrating across disparate lines of work. Yeah.
We also have another question in the chat from Annika. Do you think that people answering are unaware of where their political beliefs actually land? For example, they claim they're liberal because they see liberalism in a certain way, but their views actually align more with what we would call conservatism.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I had a similar question. And to give a personal anecdote, I was like in for a shock when I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Voter Compass. It's like, it actually was developed at U of T and it's used in Canada, where, you can answer some questions and see how your values line. And because New Zealand is so liberal, I was surprised to see that I wasn't as far liberal as I personally thought I would be. So I do think there's sometimes, reasons where we might not realize where we fall. So I think it's a great question. Now, I think the ways I've tried to combat it sort of statistically and theoretically is we also in the data set had a measure of how right to left wing you were. And we see the same pattern of results when we swap out how liberal to conservative are you with the right left wing. And we again kind of were seeing that similar idea of not really much going on with matching when we did the dichotomous voting. So I think your observation's true. Like, I think there are people who might not know exactly where they fall, but I'm hoping sort of between measuring it different ways, we've hopefully captured some of that. But I think it's a fair point. And I'm hoping, actually, maybe thanks to Tina and some data here, hopefully we're able to look at this a little bit in Canada to see what's going on here, and maybe eventually in the US as well, because there are some idiosyncrasies with the New Zealand political system that could be at play here. And again, I think some social pressures. Yeah.
Michelle.
Oh, it was a McMaster professor. Look at me not saying thank you, Tina.
Yeah, my question is about the first paper and the body satisfaction. If I remember well, I think you find that this relationship between body satisfaction and satisfaction with sexual life increases with age, if I remember well.
Yeah.
And so
Correct,
you were wondering why, and I was thinking maybe in the general model, when you don't stratify by age, if I understand well, you impose a linear relationship between body satisfaction and sexual satisfaction with sexual life. But maybe if you had a more, what I have in mind is that maybe the effect is mostly at the low level of body satisfaction. If your body satisfaction is really low, then sexual life might not work. But the difference between a 6 and a 7 on body satisfaction may not be that big. And here, I don't know if I'm right or not, but I would imagine that very low scores of body satisfaction may be more frequent among older people, and so that may explain why. I don't know, but I thought it would be interesting to have a non-linear relationship between the two.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, because I believe there has been some hints that body satisfaction is curvilinear over the life course, where it actually not exactly what you're talking about, but sort of that it plateaus, I guess. But I think that's a really great point, and something that I think I'll be able to look at in the dyadic data as well, where we're going to be able to test the curvilinears. But I can just easily, that's a really great point. Like, there's nothing stopping me running right after this, the curvilinear thing. I'm like, that's a really great point, because it's possible to, like you're saying, I think you're right. Like, maybe it's almost more of like a dichotomous thing, where if as soon as you reach a certain threshold, as long as your body satisfaction is good enough, your sexual satisfaction is fine. Yes, yeah, and that's another, not to poop on my fields, but we're not the best at looking at curvilinear effects. There's a recent movement to bring more curvilinear testing into relationship science. So that is a great tip. I wrote that down. Thank you so much.
Are there any?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Marissa. Sorry.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jess. That was a fantastic talk. Not only did I make a ton of notes about the content, but also tips on your presentation style. I love the that was fantastic. Absolutely. And very accessible to non-quantitative people, I would say. So coming to the conversation as a sociologist of mental health, I think too, for the first paper and looking at body satisfaction, immediately I'm thinking about some of those psychological resources of, kind of sense of self, personal control, confidence, those types of things. And especially how that's influenced by social class. And then I'm kind of thinking about commonalities amongst partners in terms of political belief, and how too that's very much structured by education levels, and thinking too of the different ways that children are introduced to talking about their body and thinking about their body, and how that might differ across high versus low socioeconomic status families. And so I'm wondering whether, first the socioeconomic measures you may be included in your models, but then also is there some confounding there perhaps around, body image and body satisfaction, when it comes to kind of predicting those associations versus something that might be more class-based?
Yeah, that's a great observation. And again, a kind of like a very timely, you could have tricked me into thinking you're part of the relationship field, because there's this big movement now to be like, we are not considering social class, and we really need to. And I think, so in these models, I haven't controlled for it. I could easily, like, I controlled for household income. I know that's different than social class, and especially things like, I'm wondering if they have, I'm blanking on if they had your SES growing up, because I think that would also speak to some of your questions about kind of learning the body image thing. So I don't know about that. I will say I've run some other analyses, not with body satisfaction, but just with relationship satisfaction. And this is where I think the unique New Zealand context could be a bit of a good thing in terms of if you live in New Zealand, bad thing if you're trying to find certain social class effects that we expect in North America. So I had metrics like education, like a job kind of score, as well as a deprivation score, things like, based on your area, geographically. And we weren't really finding for relationship satisfaction the same negative effects you see in say the US. So I think it's really important. I will rewrite it for body satisfaction, but I'm curious what we will find. But I think it's also a great point. I almost thought you were going a different way with it, in the sense that it's reminding me that there's also links between, say, BMI and social class and things like that. And one thing that surprises a lot of people is when I tell them that actually New Zealand has a really big obesity epidemic. It's not what we think when we think of New Zealand, and it is very much tied to culture and social class as well. So yeah, thank you so much for making me think about that and put it on my radar. And at some point, I'd love to chat to you about the best metrics of SES, because it's been something I've been struggling with for my other papers. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Jessica, for your amazing presentation, this awesome discussion period.
Thank you.
I'm going to wrap up right now as it is 3:30. If you guys have any suggestions for speakers you want to hear coming up in the winter, I'll just pop our email right in the chat there. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much. And I popped my email in the chat too if people have other questions. And yeah, I really, really appreciate everyone's great questions. And thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. And keep an eye out for our winter lineup. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.